real surveillance. And thank you. Okay, we are being recorded now. So social network analysis, it's something where, how do they connect the dots? Can we take that off? Thank you. So how we connect the dots. So this was just one example that how the one person can show that. This is another example that how social network analysis happens. You know, what are the different ways that these connections are made? And some of the estimates, I mean, I didn't sit down and do the math, but some of the estimates, and particularly as Edward Snowden was talking about metadata and all of that, some estimates were that one person can lead to almost 100,000 people. Because if one person has just 10 friends, each one of them has additional 10 friends, each one of them has additional 10 friends, and that can really exponentially increase, give access to people. So this is what social network analysis is. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Rachel to talk to us about what their findings are. Thank you.
Awesome. Is this one, can folks hear me? Is this good? Okay, great. Well, first, thank you so much. Thanks to Hamid and the whole crew at Stop LAPD Spying for being amazing partners in conceiving of this and really providing this space and this opportunity and group and really taking the lead in so many ways on making this happen. I'm thrilled to have a chance to be here to chat. So, sure, yeah. Oh, except let me take my little clicker here. Okay. All right, so let me just give a little bit of background on kind of how it is that we came to have, as Hamid says, about 10,000 pages of documents from the LAPD. Starting in early 2020, and actually let me back up just a minute for kind of, but before that, for folks who aren't familiar with the Brennan Center, which is where I am, the Brennan Center is affiliated with NYU Law School. I'm in our DC office. And we work on kind of a variety of issues, but all, what I always say is sort of all focused on systems of democracy and kind of how to make democracy function. I'm with our Liberty and National Security program, so the work that I do is related to civil liberties and national security, and more broadly kind of policing and technology and issues around civil rights and civil liberties. So we do a lot of work on social media monitoring, looking at how the police use social media to monitor, to gather information, to target people online, and also how that plays out in the schooling context, and then also at the federal level and the immigration context. So a couple of years ago, we'd been feeling like there was, on the one hand, a fair amount that was coming out about how police departments were using social media, really from popular reporting, and at the same time, a real dearth of information on what that looked like at a granular level, in part because even though it seems to be a very widespread practice among law enforcement to use social media, most police departments don't have publicly available policies that really provide information about how they use social media. So they might have a policy saying, we think social media could be useful in investigations, or maybe it's useful in these kinds of investigations. Maybe even we're putting in place some procedures or limitations around how covert accounts are being used, but very little information, at least that's publicly facing, that really provides any information about what they're doing. So we filed public records requests, ultimately with 5 police departments across the country, where there had been public reporting about the use of social media, and by and large in the context of monitoring activists, monitoring protests for racial justice, and where there had been sort of reporting on those, but still not a lot of information about what that actually looked like, because we wanted to get a better understanding. So one of the departments that we filed a request with was the LAPD under the California Public Records Act. As is very typical, they provided a couple of things, basically policies that were already available on the website, and closed the request and said, we're done. And so we said, well, we asked for, like 17 categories of documents, and it included all of the emails that you might have exchanged with, providers that are providing these tools, all of the grant requests that you might have put into the federal government for funds to support use of these tools. We're pretty sure, even just based on the reporting that's been done, that you're using these tools and that your officers are using social media, and we're pretty sure that you probably have some records about it. So working with a law firm, we sued the LAPD, and ultimately, over the course of probably 4 or 5 months, got about 10,000 pages worth of documents, a really wide range. Emails that they'd exchanged. It turned out that there were a lot of tools, and this is what I'll be walking through, a lot of third-party providers of social media monitoring products that had been marketing their tools to the LAPD, and the LAPD had been engaged in trials of a number of different tools and had used some of these tools. And so we got a lot of information about what they were, about how the LAPD itself used them, and also about kind of the promises and pitches that these tools were making that also seemed very questionable. I know that's something that Sam's going to be was going to be talking about as well, because he and his colleague did just really outstanding reporting, kind of contextualizing and digging into both what the department was doing and kind of how this was situated in the larger context of really the promises that these tools are making. So let's see if I can get this. Nope, that's not the button. I'm afraid to push another one. So I was trying that, but oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay. So these are sort of the basics. We got a lot of documents. By and large, what they showed was really that the LAPD was doing a lot of social media monitoring and had very little oversight and imposed very few restrictions. They had, oddly, they actually had a number of policies that addressed different aspects of the use of social media, and still said little that actually kind of gave their officers any guidance or really imposed any limitations. And they had engaged in some way with at least 10 companies that provided these services. So whether that was actually buying the product, doing a trial, exchanging emails with them to learn more, things like that. And a great deal of it really was focused on First Amendment protected activity around protests. So one of the first tools that we got information about is a company called Geophedia. And Geophedia, in some ways, is a little notorious. The ACLU of Northern California now, about 6 years ago, did a public records request to police departments up and down California, asking for their records in which they had interacted with social media monitoring companies. And one of the things that they found was that Geophedia and some other tools were pitching their products specifically saying, look, you can use this to monitor protesters for racial justice. You can use this to monitor, hashtag I can't breathe, things like that. So it turned out that LAPD itself had also used Geophedia from 2014 to 2016, before Geophedia and some other tools were kicked off of the major social media platforms, but everything comes back around and there are a lot of tools that are now doing the same thing. And as you can see here, the LAPD provided the search terms that are up here as their community relations division. So they said to Geophedia, we want you to track these search terms and report back to us when there are tweets and social media posts that are referencing these. And as you can see, it was basically entirely focused on racial justice activism and criticism of LA and of LAPD officials. So you have, hashtag say her name, you have Black Lives Matter LA, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice, and then you have these terms that are related to, Garcetti, Beck, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very clearly targeted. I'm pointing it this way, but I should probably point, there we go. So one of the next ones that we got information about is a tool called Data Miner. And Data Miner is really interesting. It at least used to be partly owned by Twitter. It's not entirely clear if it still is, but Twitter says on their website that Data Miner basically is an official partner of Twitter. And so Data Miner is one of the tools that has access to the broadest volume of tweets. So as a Twitter user, there's like a certain amount of information I can see, but if I start using one of these tools, I can get access to much more, and they can sift through many more tweets. Data Miner is one of the companies that has access to a very significant volume of Twitter activity to look for basically anything that you know, a company or an agency contracting with it wants to find. So the LAPD did a trial of data miner in 2016 that was scheduled to coincide with a May Day protest. And you can see here, so these are actually materials from data miner saying, look, we supported the LAPD, they monitor this May Day protest. We helped users track protest movements. We used this geospatial application. And then they sort of tout how wonderful their product was because they found information about bike rides, a Sunday fun day, not clear why that was ever even colorably posing a threat. They found these images of an anti-Trump protest, found images of protests in the LAPD detention center. Very proud, you can see down here the sort of underlined part. We uncovered the first images of people at the protest site. So these were the services that data miner was providing to the LAPD in 2016. And then LAPD also conducted a trial with data miner in 2019 and again in 2020. And that was coming from documents that Stop LAPD Spying had gotten also in a separate public records request. And again, that was essentially to track racial justice protests in real time. As sort of side note, but it's very related. The FBI also used data miner during the summer of 2020 to track racial justice protests that summer. There's been a lot of questions. Twitter and the other major platforms now have policies saying that developers can't use their user data for surveillance. It's not clear at all how data miner or some of the others, how it's sort of consistent with the policy that the platforms state that they have. So one of the other ones that we found is this company called Media Sonar. This one, unlike some of the companies that LAPD did a trial of, we received documents showing that they'd actually bought licenses, as you can see, for $58,000 in 2021. And Media Sonar says, look, we can capture a lot of information about any given individual, right? So they talk about this full digital snapshot. They have this feature called digital footprint, and they can combine not just social media information, but also information from phone directories, from business listings. And you see they say it can include all related personas and connections. So this is sort of tying back to the notion of building out these social networks based on social media data and on a pretty wide variety of data generally. They say they have access to over 2 billion public records and over 100,000 data sources. So one of the next ones is Voyager Labs. And Voyager Labs was one that was just really incredibly eye-opening. Both because, in fact, LAPD did a trial of Voyager in 2019. They did a single 4-month trial, but looking at these emails that we'd received, they were exchanging emails with Voyager for about 2.5 or 3 years. For 2018 to 2021, there are these emails. LAPD was actually very, very enthusiastic about contracting with Voyager, and essentially finally sort of ran into some funding issues. Maybe now Sam may have a better memory. It may have happened with both Voyager and Edge NPD, or I may be mixing up those two, but they did engage with Voyager over a number of years about sort of the services they had and potentially contracting with them. So as part of that, Voyager sent 2 sort of case studies to explain why their services were so terrific and why the LAPD should think about using them. So the first one is this case study based on a man named Adam Al-Sali. Adam Al-Sali had attacked a naval air station in Corpus Christi in May 2020. So Voyager is basically saying, if we had been doing social media monitoring on Adam Al-Sali, we would have found all of this information, and this information would have shown us that he posed a threat. And as you can see, the information that they're pointing to say, oh, these things clearly would have shown us that, you know, he was potentially planning violence, are basically, many of them are really largely connected to the fact that he was Muslim, to themes, to pictures, says his pride in and identification with his Arab heritage. So it's really pointing to kind of his ethnic and religious background. And then they say, we allow our clients to gain immediate insights into somebody's, again, affinity for Islamic fundamentalism or extremism. My colleague Mike German, who's here, has written and spoken quite a bit on the disconnect between extremist ideas and actually planning for violence. And then they say, we don't even have to have any human intervention, right? So there's artificial intelligence. We can produce this result. It's color coded to show how much of a threat somebody poses. and then that gets passed on, but it doesn't require any assessment by a human, which is really an incredibly kind of alarming take on the capacity of artificial intelligence. They also provided, Voyager also provided a second case study. Let's see if I can get this to forward. There we go, thank you. So Voyager sent over a second case study, which is about a man named Bhagat Saber, who's an activist with the Muslim Brotherhood, who had put up a Facebook video telling his followers to infect members of the Egyptian embassies and consulates in New York and around the country with COVID-19. So Voyager says, again, we could jump on this and we could figure out sort of what threat this poses. So this graphic here is one that they actually shared with the LAPD, sort of as part of their pitch for why the LAPD should use them. So they extracted information from 4,000 of Saber's followers, put them in this database, and basically said, well, look, if he's kind of making this call to action to his followers in New York, or to his followers, we're going to find every single one of his Facebook friends that has a location in or affiliation with New York City. Then we're going to identify the ones who actually work for a government agency, because maybe they will have access to a consulate to actually go and infect somebody with COVID-19. And then, so they sort of draw out this map, they explain who are the blue nodes, who are the orange nodes, and then they say, well, we've looked at a lot of information about his Facebook friends. We have drilled down on biographical details on all of them. Turns out he's not actually connected to anyone who's been previously flagged as an extremist, but if you hop out more steps, it turns out that he has friends, and those friends are friends with people who've been extremists, and they're kind of putting all of this together to make the case not only that he's dangerous, but even, I think the not so subtext here is, if we were doing this monitoring generally, we would find people. There would be magic in what we're finding on social media to somehow accurately identify who poses a threat. And again, Saber himself hadn't actually done anything. He'd put out this possibly ever so slightly unhinged Facebook video. Sorry? Yes, yeah, this one. Oh, yes. I know, I realize that I'm... What's that? Yeah, is this okay now? Was it to get in the screen? Okay, I know, I was realizing that it was only my arm that was gesturing into the frame. All right, so then the last one that I wanted to highlight was a company called Edge NPD. So Edge NPD made a product called ABT Shield, which they basically say can unearth disinformation. So they had, again, sort of pitched this to the LAPD. So LAPD conducted a trial of Edge NPD, specifically of ABT Shield, in October and November of 2020. So around the 2020 election, basically saying that they wanted to find information about disinformation. They set out 6 categories of data that they wanted to find tweets on. So ABT Shield specifically was monitoring Twitter. So the top categories had American policing, civil unrest, election security and disinformation, white supremacy and extremism, the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and quote unquote potential danger, which was never quite sort of defined. So over the course of those 2 months, the LAPD itself received 2 million tweets from ABT Shield. Based in part on Sam's reporting, we know that ABT Shield itself vacuumed up about 200 million tweets. And the keywords, by and large, that elicited the most tweets that ABT Shield was passing on were related to protests. It was the category of civil unrest. So you had things like protests, solidarity, and lives matter. In American policing, there were tweets about ACAB and police brutality. And then you can see here, so this is, again, part of the literature that Edge NPD sent to the LAPD. And you can see that they cast kind of language and protest around police brutality, around defund the police. They say, oh, well, these are narratives that are being used, these are organized attacks, these are automated bots and trolls. So they're sort of putting the sort of anti-police activism and advocacy in this overall context of disinformation. And then just very briefly on LAPD policy, we won't be talking a lot about this, but I did just want to highlight there is this sort of combination of, on the one hand, the policies set out a number of uses for social media, right? So there's listening, there's situational awareness, there's investigations, there's community relations, there's engagement, and at the same time, imposing almost no limits, and especially setting out very broad approval for the use of fake accounts without kind of any supervisory approval processes, as long as there's not direct interaction, but allowing officers to use fake accounts to do quite a bit of monitoring online. And then the last piece that I wanted to mention is that kind of unrelated to the use of these tools, we found out that in the course of field interview cards, which, as people are probably familiar with, there is quite wide sanction to fill out field interview cards really on anyone, right, that an officer comes into contact with on the street. And that there was, not only was there a field for social media accounts, you can see that circle over to the left, you know, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, but there were 2 memos. So a memo from Chief Beck from 2014 or 2015, and then a much more recent memo really urging officers to actually fill that in, right? So you can see down below, when completing a field interview report, officers should ask for a person's social media account information. And then again, a memo that came out about 5 years later, just generally kind of on field interview cards saying it is really critical that every single field be filled out. And so there's clearly a very strong push to collect this information and then feed it into the data banks that the police department has. So that, I will stop there. That was already a lot, and turn it over to Sam, unless Hamid wants to say anything in between.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to turn it over to Sam, but quickly ask folks, and we will have a comment and Q&A after Sam and Emilio are done. But any pressing question about the various tools that you all saw that Rachel spoke about? Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can take a stab at answering that in part, but then also Sam and Hamid might have more to add, or even Mike. And just to repeat the question, if there are folks on a Zoom who didn't hear it as well. So the question was whether the LAPD ever combines profiles through the use of different tools. And it sounds like in part the question is use of, you know, a third-party tool like one of these social media monitoring tools, but then something like Palantir. By all accounts, I think the answer is yes, at least when LAPD was using Palantir. Certainly one of the main concerns with the field interview cards was not just that those cards were going to the LAPD's own databases, but that they were then being fed into Palantir, right? And so having the social media information really like supercharges the ability not just to identify a particular person, but to very easily build out those networks of association. I mean, I think probably in part I'll turn it over to Hamid in terms of like the broader ways that the LAPD is combining its different like tranches or streams of data that are coming in.
Yeah, I mean, LAPD is, they use the Palantir system very extensively. It's been at the heart of creating profiles, and not just Palantir, the LAPD is investing incredible amounts of money in expanding their record management systems as well. Just right now, there's an item there that they want another $13 million to expand their record management systems. They just got $5 million a few years ago. So yeah, the short answer to your question is definitely a broad scope. So maybe with that, I'll pass it on to Sam, and Sam, if you're welcome to sit down as well if you want to, but we can start with answering that question. Oh, yeah. So the question is if that information that has been gathered can be used in a court hearing as evidence.
I'm not a lawyer, but I think often yes. I mean, often the LAPD is getting warrants from social media companies to obtain this information, and then they can use it in court. And so I think we do see that happen quite a lot, and they do have the ability to do that. So the short answer, I believe, is yes.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just sort of to add a gloss on this, so sure. I mean, I think anything that the department is collecting through these sort of publicly available means, right? So whether it's an officer or detective themselves looking at information or using one of these tools to pull information, I think there's zero reason to think that it wouldn't or couldn't then potentially be used in the context of a criminal case. There is then the additional piece, right, about obtaining a warrant. So the kinds of information that we've been talking about the police obtaining would largely be through publicly available social media, right? So I have a Twitter account that's public. Anyone can look at it. So too could an officer, and so too could one of these tools if they, sort of have gotten authorization from the platform to collect this information. They can collect it as well. Or then the next step is, an officer opens up an undercover account and connects with me online, say with something on Facebook, I accept the request. And then even if I had privacy settings on my account, they could then see things like, what's appearing on my page, who am I friends with, things like that. If they want to get more information, for instance, DMs that I'm exchanging with somebody to which they're not a party, that's then when something like a subpoena or warrant would come into play. They would have to show probable cause of a crime. And then that kind of request they would make directly to the platform. So most platforms have mechanisms in place to allow somebody to come with basically legal process, right? To say, I have a warrant, this is why it's part of this investigation, and I have reason to believe. There are issues with that as well. Some of the warrants are incredibly broad, but that's how some of that more private information would be obtained.
And
Thank you.
one point I can add to that, just I think from files that Rachel got was, we saw that LAPD was actively instructing officers to use social media as much as possible and to specifically create these undercover accounts, these accounts that are fake profiles, to find this information and to friend people and to get this kind of context. And the videos that were showing how LAPD actually encouraged this were super racist. They were basically showing caricatures of Black people in just an incredibly offensive way, and just saying this is how you should use social media because you don't want the a situation in which someone shows up to court in a suit, but in reality they're actually a gangster. This is directly how the LAPD was presenting this stuff and how they were sort of conceiving of the use of social media. And so it's certainly something that they do quite often. Anyway, thanks so much for having me here. I'm really happy to be here. I've a lot of the reporting I've done has been explicitly using the records from the Brennan Center and from Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And so I'm just really grateful for the work that both of these organizations do and just uncovering these records, because there's such a lack of transparency around these issues, and it's just so hard to get very basic information about what the police departments are doing, as well as what these companies are claiming they can do. And so I thought I could just give you all a little bit of background on what my experience has been reporting on this and sort of what we've found in investigating this. But mostly I would love to just hear from folks, and if people have questions about what it's like to report on this stuff, I'd be happy to answer that. But just to jump off of one of the last companies that Rachel was talking about, which was the company Edge NPD, I had a very interesting time trying to get basic information from them. I think one thing that I'm not sure if Rachel mentioned, but they're actually a Polish company. So they're a company ran by this Polish guy who actually has zero experience doing anything with law enforcement. And so he was someone who actually did pick up my call, and I had a very sort of illuminating long interview with him where we talked about sort of what his technology can actually do, and I questioned him about sort of his claims and the marketing that he was putting forward in all these LAPD emails. And he basically admitted that he, had no expertise in sort of law enforcement and in public safety, and he was actually just sort of sending tweets along to LAPD that he thought were interesting. And so he would see a viral post about something that happened at a protest, and he would personally email it to an LAPD officer that he'd been working with and said, hey, this seems interesting, check it out. And this is how LAPD was handling this. They were basically just accepting random tweets from a guy in Poland and just, taking that information in. And he was very, in the public records that Rachel obtained, we see this back and forth where he's presenting his capabilities as, very powerful, and, we can detect these trends and we can detect public safety threats by the way that we monitor social media and with our algorithms. But when I actually talked to him on the phone, he essentially said, oh, I was just sort of passing stuff along, and he admitted that we're not actually checking for accuracy. There's no fact checking that we do. It's up to law enforcement to handle that. And so I think that was a good sort of window into how these relationships work. We see that these companies, these private companies who have, little accountability and no transparency, are just sort of setting these agendas, and LAPD is sort of very, very interested in all these different firms. And there's so many different companies, as Rachel went through all of those, that do that. And so that was just sort of one interesting example of trying to get sort of basic information from these companies. Similarly, Voyager, who had those case studies of the Muslim Brotherhood activist, was another company where we really just couldn't get any basic information. They were really sort of stonewalling us, and a lot of their marketing materials made these very, very broad claims about what their algorithms were capable of doing. And when we got sort of algorithmic experts to look at these documents, they all said the same thing, which was, this is marketing BS, right? Like, this is just the things you're claiming that your AI can do, they cannot do. It's not possible, right? You can't predict crime. You can't do all these things. And for all of us in this room, it's probably pretty obvious, right? Like, you can't predict crime before it happens, and you can't take someone's social media, accounts and be able to make these conclusions and who you should be monitoring, who you should be arresting. It's unethical, it's wrong, and it just doesn't work. But when we press the company on it, they basically just respond with their same marketing. And in that case, we were really pressing them on specific claims they were making about different sort of AI capabilities, including with words that don't actually mean anything in the field of AI. And when we kept pushing them on that, they responded with random Wikipedia articles that sort of illustrated how little they really knew about the basic sort of technology and how this stuff works. And so that was a just sort of interesting detail and experience for me as a reporter trying to get basic information. And I guess so this is a little just thing we made from showing how Voyager worked. But I can just tell a little bit more about some reporting I've done related to sort of how LAPD technology actually impacts real people on the ground. And then we'll wrap it up from me rambling. But one sort of piece of reporting that we did a lot of work on with Hamid and with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition related to... I'm being silenced. Can you guys, is this working? Is this better? Is this mic on? Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. I think one thing about this type of reporting and these types of stories is that it's extremely hard to make this real for readers as a journalist, right? This stuff is very abstract often, and with these records, it's filled with jargon, and it's hard to understand how real people are being impacted. And so one thing that I've really strived to do in my reporting is to just, talk to the impacted communities, talk to people who have been affected by this kind of surveillance. And I just will walk through one story I did last year that I think sort of illustrates this. It's not directly related to social media monitoring, but I did a lot of work and working with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition and the documents they found, looking at how LAPD targeted Nipsey Hussle and his businesses before his passing. And the documents that Hamid and others obtained showed that LAPD had this long interest in Nipsey Hussle's business, which was something that Nipsey himself, right, had talked about a lot throughout his life, being stopped, being questioned, and just the heavy police presence at Crenshaw and Slauson. We all sort of knew this, but what the documents showed was that LAPD had a specific program called Laser, which I'm sure you all know lots about, so I won't sort of go into too much detail, but obviously this was something that was using data to target people, right? And this was a data-driven policing program where they were supposed to, quote unquote, extract offenders and extract problems from communities. And what the documents showed was that they used this specific program as a way to target his business at Crenshaw and Slauson with a police presence. And the documents showed that he, in fact, that the police, in fact, put police there at high numbers and stopped people who were just fit very vague descriptions because they said their data justified it. And so what was interesting about reporting on that was I talked to people who were directly targeted by this, and none of them had heard of this specific program, right? They were not aware that they were being targeted in this way, but then telling them sort of what was in these documents, they said it validated kind of their experiences. And so that's why it's so important to get these records, right? Because it actually like brings some sort of facts and details and truth to what people's experiences are. And so I spent a lot of time talking to Nipsey's brother, Sam, about just what they had been through and how, you know, throughout their lives, the two of them had been stopped, questioned, bothered, arrested, taken to jail, all of this stuff, you know, just outside their business, and how it got worse as Operation Laser started targeting them. And so by sort of them recounting their experiences, by Sam telling me sort of what he had been through, we're able to kind of reconstruct how that escalated and how that kind of surveillance and targeting became so much worse after Operation Laser started focusing on them. And so that was just, you know, one of the things he said that really stuck with me and was just really sad was that, you know, people would stop coming to the business because they knew if they came there, they would be stopped, right? And so if you had a warrant, or if you are someone who just didn't want to have contact with police, like, don't come to the Marathon store because you know police are going to stop you. And that matches what we see in the documents, which is that they focused so much on the store. And it's really grim and sad, right, to think about this like family trying to start this business and just doing like something very good, that like universally good for this community. And police themselves, by having this surveillance, by having this targeting, are making it so much harder for them, right? And actually causing quite a lot of harm, leading to arrests, questioning of people. Sam told me one story about like officers from another outside of California who were off duty, who were just like fans of Nipsey, who came through one day and were stopped by police and questioned. And the officers themselves were like, what the hell? Like, you know, like, this is really shocking. And, you know, I don't know why the officers themselves would be surprised, but that's how sort of pervasive this was, right? It was just like stopping any person of color, any black and brown person going through the store and questioning them. And so I think that like that story to me, it's not specific to social media, but we saw how LAPD sort of used technology and the veneer of data to do these practices and to sort of justify this type of targeted policing that, you know, widely seen as very discriminatory and racist and, you know, just unjustified and, you know, an unfair use of resources. And there's just countless stories of that, right? Like you have people who have been killed by LAPD who are in these zones that LAPD is targeting based on the data that they're saying justifies it. And it's hard to always make those connections, but you know that this is how LAPD is sort of devoting its resources and justifying its actions. So I think that's all of the ramble I have. I don't know if anyone has any questions about just what it's like to report on this. I guess just one last point I'll leave you with is that LAPD is extremely not transparent, which is probably not surprising to anyone here, but as a reporter who works with questions and talks to a lot of police departments, LAPD, I can say, is the most not transparent I've dealt with, just simply by the fact that they don't really engage much with reporters anymore on these types of stories. And so for all of these many stories I've done using the documents that both of these organizations have put to light, like I've gotten zero comment, nothing from them. And, you know, that's not for lack of trying, right? Like I've really tried super hard to like get some of them on the phone and like actually understand what they would say to try to justify this and explain like, why are you pursuing all these companies? Why are you talking to 10 different social media companies about potential monitoring and doing services that are the same? And just we've been unable to get any information. And so I think that is just worth noting because it's significant how not transparent they are. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you. Maybe we can hold off because Amelia has been waiting, but I know that you have a quick comment on Sam's thing.
I was just going to say really briefly, I can't say enough about the reporting that Sam and his colleague Johanna did. It is really worth finding the articles. There was a series of 4 articles in The Guardian between about September and November maybe of 2021. And really he was a gift to work with, and the information that he was able to get and help contextualize about the documents and what it meant from the LAPD's point of view, and what the tools really meant, and how it was impacting people on the ground.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
And if anyone has, story ideas or whatnot, reach out.
Thank you. So now we want to bring in a comrade, a brother, an organizer, somebody who's been has been an active part of Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, was a part of our coordinating team for the longest time, helped organize 2 major events and actions when we shut down the Fusion Center in LA. So want to invite Emilio with the Youth Justice Coalition. And Emilio, you've been hearing these conversations, you've heard the investigation, what Brennan Center found, all the documents and all of that. You heard Sam speak about the reporting that has happened. And obviously, you've been on the front lines on fighting back gang injunctions and gang databases and the FI card and how that is filled out. But let's talk about the impact, on youth, on young people, because obviously social media is a very actively medium of communication. So take it from there.
Yeah, thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hey, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for accommodating. Sorry I couldn't be there in person with you all. Hamed, Rachel, Sam, thanks for all your hard work. I'm learning a lot right now. It's a good brush up. I was there the first days when the coalition launched and was really excited, and also really creeped the fuck out, to be honest, about how much we were being surveilled. That I didn't even realize in my own neighborhood, right? For me, it was Wilshire Division growing up near Mid-City, West LA, who was always harassing me and my friends on our way home from school, going to the 7-Eleven, just trying to go to the park and take the bus to the beach, all those kind of things. Those were kind of my first experiences as a young person dealing with LAPD. So then years later to be there when this coalition is launching and realize there's these really well-resourced programs that are specifically targeting Black and Brown folks. And then just taking notes on some of these programs that you all are sharing with us tonight is really scary, like the level of Islamophobia and anti-Blackness. And it also makes me think of how, especially Black leaders currently, leaders and organizers are being targeted on social media and criticized by white mainstream media, and also law enforcement as well, and how that's definitely a tactic to break up counterinsurgency, to harm organizers, and to continue to oppress our communities. One of the things that I was kind of introduced into this work around 2010 to 2014 was really supporting families impacted by police violence, both across LA County, mostly by the sheriffs more than LAPD, families that I've worked with directly, but also across the state of California as we push for state legislation around police violence, police decertification, and also alternatives to policing. And Sam's done a lot of amazing work. I've read a lot of his pieces, and we've, as an organization, have collaborated together on some of those, which is so important to uplift the voices of the people that are most directly impacted, right? And I just remember there were a few times, and this was before I knew anything about these fucked up racist programs, where family members would tell us, yeah, I got these weird messages from people asking me about our protests, whether it was in Bakersfield or here in LA or up in Sacramento. And then I started to realize that they were being creeped on and surveilled, and that these trolls, probably cops behind these profiles, were trying to learn more about these actions. And some of them were literally just like family-led actions, 15 to 20 people sometimes in front of a police department. And I remember that was kind of very strange to me. And then as our social network platforms for YJC have grown, especially over the last 3 to 5 years, seeing like trolls all of a sudden, like this is when I first opened up like a Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts for YJC about 10, 11 years ago, I was just hoping anyone would see what we were doing and would share our work and show up to some of these actions and events And I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined like that we would get trolls. And our work in the county is really focused around, as Gloria was talking about yesterday on the amazing conversation you all had as well, Hamid, about our work to move funding away from juvenile probation, which is $400 million, to create this new Department of Youth Development. And now all of a sudden we have like people from probation trolling us and talking shit in the comments of our posts. And to me, that tells us that we're doing something right. And so as creepy and scary as it is, it's also like when they start to push back harder, you kind of know, okay, we're starting to pluck away at them in pursuit of abolition over reform, which you all also talked about yesterday, which I hella appreciated. So anyways, you know, for me, I think when we look at white supremacy and how it's playing out in the surveillance stalker state, it's really important to think about what information do those of us on the ground need to know. Because even though I've read some of the articles and been to a few of these events, like this breakdown of some of these programs is really helpful for me to take back to Chuco's Justice Center, to take back to our youth organizing team, which is mostly system impacted young people, youth and millennials, and take back to our students and our school staff as well, to let them know in the light of transformative justice, right? De-escalation also includes virtual de-escalation, right? Which is a core value of transformative justice. So one thing I always remind people when they ask me about social media and stuff like that is whenever you're having conflict with someone, especially if it's a family member, a coworker, or you know, infighting between organizers, keep it offline, right? If you need to talk to somebody, pick up the phone, make a phone call, use the Signal app, right? Signal messaging app, which is more safe and secure. Message people directly, meet in person, don't take your phones with you, like really basic things that people don't think about at all. And the thing that disgusted me the most about some of the like infighting, even within families that are organizing across the state, is these random accounts that will pop up in these kind of Facebook groups and on these threads, seemingly to like incite more drama. So those are a few things that I'm just always constantly doing and trying to remind people that we're just not consciously thinking about on the daily basis. And it's really gross that on top of everything else, just trying to survive in society, that system impacted people and impacted families have to think about this extra layer of surveillance, harassment, and targeting. And when we talk about someone like Nipsey, who is a hero and a legend, here in LA, especially for folks in South Central, it just breaks your heart. It doesn't surprise you, but it breaks your heart, and it just shows the kind of impact that he was making, like beyond music, here in LA. So this has been really insightful, and my hope is, how do we deliver this information to folks on the ground in an organized way and in like a streamlined way? And I think this is a really great step. So I really appreciate you all.
Thank you, Emilio. And if we can keep Emilio there, so at least we'll open it up for some comments and Q&A. I just want to add that one thing that we saw, this term fake accounts, you know, it was in Rachel's presentation as well. And in 2012, the LAPD passed a policy in September of 2012 that it says that they can take on what they call fictitious personas, basically, which are fake accounts. So it's not just that they are randomly making fake accounts. It's a policy that the LAPD has, that they can take on fictitious personas, fake names, to friend people. The other part of that policy also is that they can place an informant in any group based on a tip for 6 months, which is called the initial investigation, which is not the lead investigation. It is just based on a tip, which can then be extended by another 180 days as well, by another 6 months too. So these are sort of official policies. And on the same note, I would also say that we speak about, because when we talk about surveillance, we say surveillance, spying, and infiltration. And many times when we talk about infiltration or spying, you know, it just kind of takes on where people think of something out of James Bond movie or something like that, espionage and things like that. But this is real. This is real. And we have to look at social media monitoring as infiltration. We have to name it as infiltration. We have to name it as an intent to cause harm to people. And just that's what Emilio was saying, that you're double criminalized. That one, you know, just you have been, somebody has been murdered in the family, and then they troll you, and then they follow you, and then they double criminalize the person who's been harmed as well. So these are the things we were hoping to have this conversation, because now the next session we want to do in the next 30 minutes or so is to, of course, hear if you have any questions and all, but also to strategize. Because we're not here to help develop a policy for transparency and accountability. That's not the work that the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition does, because they kill us transparently. It's in your face violence. There's nothing hidden about it. But we are here to dismantle and abolish this system. We are here to abolish the police and abolish and dismantle these programs. So with that in mind, so let's just start off. And Chela, you had a question or a comment? Thank you, Chela. Appreciate it. Thank you for reminding us that. Yes, sir. Thank you, Chela. Appreciate it. Appreciate you always. Any other questions or comments or thoughts? Yes, please. So the question is that that they can take fictitious personas or create fake accounts, but they have to be in direct contact with somebody. Is that the question? What counts as a direct contact? Okay.
So thank you. Let me just repeat the question for anyone who hadn't heard. So I understand the question, right? So there was sort of the policy language, right, about the LAPD policies, and showing that not only could they create fake accounts, but basically without any kind of supervisory authority if they weren't interacting directly with people. I don't have the specific language in front of me. My recollection is that the idea would be they could use a fake account to, for instance, follow somebody, but not to like message somebody, or even to send, say, a friend request on Facebook. I think that would be seen as direct interaction. But if they're using a fake account to carry out the sort of listening, situational awareness, monitoring capabilities, then that would be allowed. There's also certainly then interaction with people that would be permitted, that brings with it some more levels of kind of approval and oversight, if you will. That's where sort of the distinction is being.
And just like one other brief point related to that is that creating fake accounts is like against Facebook's policy. And when we reported on this, like Facebook immediately responded and basically wrote like a letter to LAPD asking them to stop doing this because it's like against their policy. And you know, we had evidence that LAPD was directly doing this and instructing officers to do that. And so, you know, there's no accountability. I'm not sure if like LAPD ever responded, but it's just worth remembering that that's also not allowed by Facebook policies.
I'm going to go over there to Soma and then to you. Go ahead. No, that is in person. I mean, it doesn't have to be online. So the question was that whether they can infiltrate and for the 6-month thing, whether that is only online or was that the question? It could be anything. It could be the most recent example was that just about 2 years ago, the RCP, Revolutionary Communist Party, their meetings were infiltrated by the LAPD, particularly at the church in Echo Park, where they were having these meetings. And this was in 2017, where there were these actions going on the ground around the Trump-Pence regime must go. And that was a big thing where the LAPD had informants who were just in those meetings, and they had infiltrated that group. So does that answer your question? Okay. So yeah.
Owned by the same. I'm sorry. Isn't Facebook and Instagram owned like by the same company, right? Like so shouldn't they share the same policy like they do?
So that's a great question, and I can address that. So you're exactly right. Facebook and Instagram are both owned by what is now Meta, right? So there are policies, there is an overarching policy that they share that governs both platforms that basically says that no sort of developer, right, of all these kinds of like third-party tools that we were talking about are supposed to use their user data for surveillance purposes. And Twitter has a similar policy. Interestingly, Facebook, as far as I can tell, their policy around surveillance, which again came out of these revelations about how Geophedia was marketing its services to police departments, Facebook used to have a fairly vague policy around surveillance. They had a policy against it, but it was never defined. It seemed maybe a little intentionally vague. The last time I looked at their policy, actually it had become much more sort of more precise and broader. There's really a definition around surveillance and included basically any activities that would be sort of tied to law enforcement. So those platforms share that overall policy against using their data for surveillance. And Sam is right that after sort of all these materials came out, the Meta civil rights team wrote to LAPD and said, we can tell that some of what you're doing violates our policies. We think that maybe some of the other stuff that you're doing, if it turns out to be true in the ways that you're using these tools, also violate it. The difference between Facebook and Instagram is that Facebook has what's called, sort of colloquially called the real name policy, right? So if you're on Facebook, you're supposed to have a single account, no more than one, and it's basically you're supposed to reflect your actual identity. And so that goes with you can't have multiple accounts, you can't have an account under a fake name or using a fake picture. Instagram and Twitter don't have those limitations because you can have any name you want, right? You can be anonymous, you can choose a random screen name, you can have a picture, you can have multiple accounts, and that's contemplated by the way the platform works. And so that's where the policies for Facebook and Instagram sort of diverge, is specifically that like real name part.
One more question. So is it because the reason why they changed the policy, is it because when they brought what is his name, Zuckerberg to what they call it, court, I guess, or Congress, when he was doing that little,
When he was testifying?
yeah, when he was testifying, is it did they change it around that time, or
That's a great question, and I don't know. It's not dated, as far as I can tell on the website, when it was changed. So I don't know exactly when it happened or sort of what prompted the change to the policy. I mean, they've always had this real name policy, but in terms of the change, like the change to the surveillance language, I don't know exactly when it happened. I will say, in terms of, so you're right, he was testifying before Congress. He's testified several times, right? Because Congress has been looking at the social media platforms. Congress, by and large, is not interested in this question of how governmental agencies are using social media information, right? So the ways in which police departments, the FBI and DHS collect or use or monitor social media, that has not really been a topic of any interest. What Congress has been looking at is how the platforms themselves are kind of moderating or policing how their users use the platforms. So I don't think in general that this change of the surveillance policy necessarily would have been connected to Zuckerberg testifying, because he was sort of testifying on different stuff.
I thought he was mostly testifying. I thought he was mostly testifying under because the subject that I kept hearing about was privacy. You know what I'm saying? And I thought that they were changing like the way people are looking at people's private messages, comments. They're just going into different things to find whatever they're finding on people. But yeah, that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I just had obviously if I violate the terms for a social media platform, then they can delete my account and whatever they want to do. But if I'm a police officer and I use that fake account to gather lots of data, like, are there any consequences for the use of that data? I mean, it's not like it's not like I collected stuff illegally. I just collected it against the policies of a private corporation, right? So does that become poison fruit, or?
That
I mean, I was just going to say that, like, the consequences could be them just removing that specific profile, right, or kicking that person off. And when it comes to Twitter, like we've seen when we reported on Edge NPD, which was that Polish company, like after we did that reporting and Twitter found that it violated their policies and said that, or even like while we were doing that reporting before we even published the story, Twitter kicked off its developer access, which gives it like access to the API and stuff. And so there was that consequence for that company. But I mean, I don't think there are any other, oh, maybe Rachel has some thoughts, but there aren't really any other consequences that, police or these companies would face other than the same action like a civilian would face, which could be just to be removed.
Yeah, no, that's basically right. In terms of how they could use the information, right? It would be governed either by, is there, a police department policy on it, or is there a law? Is there a state or federal law, or are there constitutional limitations on it? Basically, all of those, the answer is there are really no restrictions, right? So there are very few police department policies, and that's not really going to affect whether information could be used in court anyway. There are basically no existing state or federal laws governing this aspect, governing the access to and use of publicly available information. Cal ECPA, I think there's an argument that there are aspects of it that apply to social media. And then there are really no constitutional limitations, right? So usually like the Fourth Amendment, right? That would affect, how the government can get information, right? If it sort of builds in some privacy protections and protections against government intrusion. But quite consistently, courts have found, for instance, that it is totally fine for police officers to represent themselves as somebody other than who they are, whether that's in person or online. So really the only way that would come up is if, there was information that the police were supposed to have gotten a warrant for and somehow obtained that information a different way that turned out to be a Fourth Amendment violation. But largely to your question about whether there would be consequences like for the information itself, I mean, you're right. It's just about the platform's own policies. So the consequences might be getting kicked off the platform, but it's not really going to be in terms of how that data is used in a criminal context.
So I think just building off of a lot of what people are saying, I was thinking of strategy, which you had brought up, Hamid, like how do we go after these companies? And it seems like whenever we go after like laws, LAPD, they just come back with reform. Somehow they make it so that, you know, there's a firewall or we have to have oversight or, you know, things like that. So it always seems like it's a like futile effort, and we saw that with PredPol, and we saw that with Operation Laser, and they came with data-informed community-focused policing. So I started thinking about, and I was really reminded, Sam, when you were talking about how these like algorithms are, like they don't even know what the fuck they're doing. Like there's just a bunch of people in a room pretending that this is something that is, you know, showing where crime is going to be or showing who's, you know, an extremist. And so then it made me think of like this kind of veneer, like you were saying, of a war, but really what they're doing is going after land, they're going after people, and they're using all this stuff to pretend that they're doing something, like, you know, rooting people out. So like if we think about strategy, it's like, you know, going after, like, for example, what Chella was saying about Skid Row, like they're trying to rezone Skid Row currently right now, and Operation Laser laid out all the zones where they're trying to rezone, laid out where all the anchor points were actually hotels they're trying to take over. So like how do we, and I started thinking like we need to create tension, right? So do we go after the planning department right now where the environmental report is going to be coming out soon, and do we like raise this issue there, or can we like get more emails that, you know, go between like maybe these private companies and private security of, I don't know, like I'm just thinking of like the real estate owners that are invested, are they sharing information with public entities? And is that one way that we bring out like how harmful these things are and that they're actually really going after land? So like how do we create tension amongst all the entities that have like vested interest in the land or vested interest in removing people from land? So that was one thing I was thinking about a strategy, because it seems like going after LAPD, they just get information on how to reform that particular tactic.
Thank you. That's a really good segue into what we want to do is to dismantle this damn thing. But before we go there, I just wanted to see if Emilio, if you have any comments or anything at all. Okay, we have chat on the screen, but Emilio, are you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, so just wanted to see if you have any thought or a question or a comment.
I think one thing I didn't mention earlier, based on Rachel's presentation, which I thought was really interesting, was, you know, we are a community-based organization. We are abolitionists, but we're also a nonprofit. And we've been approached for years, especially more recently, from, you know, different candidates running for different positions, either in the city or the county or the state, wanting to collaborate or kind of get some sort of rubber stamp from like community, you know, organizations that they're seeking approval from, you know, when they're going through their election process. And when I was looking at some of those programs and some of the way they were monitoring tweets, they're monitoring both like anti-Garcetti and anti-Trump actions similarly. And I've been to dozens of those actions myself on the streets. And I thought it was really interesting that regardless of whether the protest is against a Democrat or Republican, they're going to come with the same sort of surveillance, the same sort of stalker state, the same sort of profiling. And it was kind of just reminding me that at the end of the day, like neither the Democrat or Republican Party really gives a shit about our people that are being impacted the most. And which is why I really appreciate spaces like this coalition, where has always been unapologetically abolitionist, where there's all these opportunities, whether it's with elected officials or foundations or others, to move away from that. And I think those of us that have stayed true to that are in a position now where we can continue to take action, where we said abolition in a general sense 10 years ago. A lot of folks just kind of shook their head and were like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not possible. Or even the idea of defund the police became extremely popular over the last couple of years. And now, to me, what's inspiring is how young people, students, right? High school students and college students all across California were reaching out to us. Like, how do we organize a protest? Like, what are you guys working on? How can we team up? We're talking about teenagers who have never engaged in this work before. And that's kind of what's kept me going, kept me inspired.
Thank you, Emilio. So thank you, Jamie, for just guiding us in that direction around building that strategy. Maybe if we can leave that up so Emilio can also be present there as well. So I think the question for us is that obviously as this was revealed and especially these things came out, one thing that we didn't mention was that they were also taking down social security numbers as well on the field interview cards. So once this came out, then they stopped taking that social security number. So now talking about a strategy and talking about, just stopping them or ending this practice of gathering social media, what would that look like? And who all in the room is ready to fight back? Who all in the room is ready to hunker down, engage in, and exactly like another challenge from Chela that we have is that how do we get out in the community? It's like, every Wednesday, for example, the coalition, we are out in Skid Row and we've started actively since because of COVID now, we are out on the streets and we're reaching out to the folks. We're going to start having our conversations at our home in Skid Row, and actually the next Tuesday's meeting is going to be in Skid Row as well, at our home, at LA Can, where we'll be talking about all of these things, about our organizing plan for the year, with especially going after social media, the data processing systems of Palantir, facial recognition technology, the architecture of surveillance that you see back there, and the stalker state, that how information moves within various systems as well. So let's, we have about 10 or 15 minutes left, and I know there's dinner out there ready as well. So the question is, what next? Where do we go from here? Because this was not just planned to be a conversation, this is to be taking action. So let's talk about it. Anybody who wants to share a thought? Yes.
Not to trigger people off, but 2021, I believe in January, was the Long Beach counter protest for the Patriot March. Long story short, there were counter protesters, and obviously there was a clash with, Patriot type people there. And eventually, about 10, 11 months down the line, back in December last year, about, I don't know the number, but anywhere between 8 to 11 individuals were arrested, mostly on the left-wing side. And the criminal charge alleges that they agreed to commit criminal acts based off of a social media post they liked 7 days before the actual event. So I was wondering, moving forward, how do we apply improved best practices and as well as safeguard ourselves from this potential pitfall in the future?
Great comment. Sam, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that was San Diego, if I'm remembering correctly. Because I think there was a very over-aggressive prosecutor who's pursuing these sort of gang charges.
It was a joint raid between LA and San Diego on, 8, 11 individuals. And all just liking a social media post 7 days before the actual thing occurred. So I was wondering what your guys' thoughts on that and how we can best prevent that pitfall in the future.
So I think that what the question is leading to is that what's our defense?
Yes.
Right? What's our defense? So let me just directly ask, there's some kick-ass organizers in the room, what is our defense? I'm going to put people on the spot. And I'm moving in directions of people who are actively engaged and out there and organizing. What's our defense? Let me just bring the mic to you. Go ahead.
Just an idea. Maybe we should develop a kind of internal policy between the coalition, or maybe some kind of informative pamphlet or something to help people who are organizing and going to protests, as far as just like what not to do. Because I think knowledge is a good defense. It's a good starting point.
What not to do? What's your defense?
Well, the case he's talking about, or they're talking about, is they're being charged federal conspiracy as Antifa. The quote unquote gang is capital A Antifa. So I think no, that's really what the prosecutor is pushing. And so I think first our defense is to beat back fascist prosecutors that try to bring these trumped up charges. But also one practice that we have is that for People's City Council, if it's an autonomous action or it's not an action hosted by us, Stop LAPD Spying, BLM, we won't post the flyer because it will trigger law enforcement to be like, oh, well, they're promoting it. And if something happens, like Garcetti's house had been vandalized one time, and I specifically remember like, oh, we're not going to post this because something could happen. And if we had posted it, we would have likely been blamed for that vandalism. So that's one active step, is if you do plan to go to autonomous actions and you block up and things like that, just don't post like that you're going to be there.
Anybody else? Because one of the things that at least the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition has always done is really be very open and public about any of the events. I mean, we've been, just back in 2014, even just taking over Garcetti's home at our drones fight, they were already waiting, about 50 strong in riot gear and all of that. And this was on Facebook. Some of us still don't know how to use Twitter and Instagram or things like that, which is a good thing. But I think it goes back to, people have asked us, like, how do you really defend yourself? And quite frankly, I don't know if there's any magic button to that. You just got to be smart about it, because we're always infiltrated. I mean, and I don't mean like, just because infiltration takes on many forms. Nonprofits are infiltrations. I mean, that whole process itself, that these are state agencies. So even to that extent, it could also be, we can be infiltrated as well. So I think what is our best practice in the sense that how do we speak to each other, and we're not, outing ourselves in the sense that we're making ourselves vulnerable, but be strong and be powerful about it. Did you have a comment, Chella?
No, Baba, you said it perfectly. There's no real way. Like, pigs are going to show up no matter what, especially when there's more than like 2 or 3 of black people gathering, 2 or 3 brown people gathering. They are going to show the fuck up. So you gotta be already ready for it. You gotta have a fucking exit strategy, especially for disabled folks. You have to have an accessibility strategy for folks with different language accessibilities. You have to have different strategies for it, because, like, honestly, we are fucked as the last. Sorry, I'm a little, but Baba was right.
All right.
Ahmed was right.
Okay, any other thoughts, anything? So I think, again, the question is that who all is ready to get into this thing? Who all is ready to strategize? Who all is ready to plan? Who all is ready to research? Who all is ready to build that ground power and build that political education? I just want to see a show of hands. All right, all right. So are people ready to be out on the streets? Are people ready to be out, next Tuesday? We're having a whole planning session about this thing. How many people are down to come visit that? It's at 838 East 6th Street in Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles, right? So what do we want to do about that? That's going to be at 6 o'clock on the 24th. And what we want to do is to turn that into, because our hope was today, but there was so much conversation, that was really good conversation going on, but we want to continue this conversation. The next time we meet, it'll have to be to strategize together. It'll have to be building that community education. It'll have to be where. So Emilio, my question to you is, especially how it's impacting young people and the youth at YJC. How do you see building that ground power, and how do you see that organizing building as well?
Yeah, I appreciate you. Honestly, I was gonna say something around materials, and I'm sure you all have hella materials already, but stuff that we can share on social media, like tips around monitoring. Like I know in 2020 we put out a little guide around like protest tips and stuff like that for folks to take precaution. And I think also around surveillance and social media, like how do we put out just do's and don'ts. Here's a few things you can do and to think about. To learn more information, hit up Stop LAPD Spying, etc. I think having little cards we can pass out in the streets, we can pass out in front of halls, camps, schools, places that we do outreach and organizing, and also to our students at our school.
Thank you. And we have somebody on Zoom who's got their hand raised. So I think, do they have a question or a comment? It says B. Beekman raised hand.
Hi, wow, B. Beekman here. Thanks for seeing my hand. I was raising it just to, I'd like to participate in what you'll be doing next week. I don't know if it'll be a Zoom meeting or not, but I'm from the SF Bay area and I'm really interested in what I'm hearing. I come from a place that working towards transparency and accountability and negotiation is really important, and it's doing some interesting work in the Bay Area at this time. It isn't totally getting what we want, but I think there's an interesting thing that's happening by directly negotiating with government, local government, that should be noted. And that I suppose is different than how what LA needs to address and how to work on their issues. So it's interesting to hear these words and how different, I don't know, I guess different programs can somehow connect. That's an important concept, hopefully, and that's where I come from. And if that's the case, man, it could be some interesting work, because they need, how do we take the next steps to go from reform to abolition? I think that's the key. How do they learn those lessons? And I think that's the goals that we're trying to work on. I would like to work on in the SF Bay area right now. So thanks for your work here.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you have a comment? Any other thoughts? Yes, please.
I have two quick questions. One is, in the documents that you all turned up, did you receive any evidence of these companies being used by school districts, or like LAUSD specifically, or LAPD coordinating with school police in monitoring young people's social media accounts? And the second related question is, did you all kind of create any kind of list of the individuals who are particularly targeted, and have anybody reached out to them through the social media monitoring?
Those are great questions. All right, can Pete? Oh. Yeah, people can hear this? Okay, great. Yeah, so those are both great questions. So in terms of whether the companies that we were looking at, that we got documents on, that there was sort of, I don't know, evidence or information suggesting that they were being used by schools or school districts. Not that I know of for those particular ones, but that seems to be mostly because it's different companies that are pitching their services to school districts, right? So social media monitoring is for schools particularly, is a major industry as well. There are some other so there's a company called Social Sentinel, there's a company called GeoListening, there's now a company called Gaggle that doesn't do social media per se, but will scan basically anything on like a school provided device. So definitely it is a major industry right now. I don't know the background. Hamid may well, in terms of the LAPD's coordination with school districts or specific schools. We didn't see it in the context of the documents that we got, but certainly most large school districts, right? There's quite a bit of use of, sort of law enforcement, school resource officers. In terms of whether we got information about who specifically was being targeted, by and large, no. With what, so we obviously got a lot of information about the kinds of like concepts and events and keywords and things like that were being targeted. In terms of specific people, in the tweets that we got from the Edge NPD, from ABT Shield product, most of those were seeing the tweets that they actually flagged, like, the kinds of terms that were coming up, and they mostly, when they sent us the documents, redacted the specific accounts that had sent them out. To some extent, you could sort of reverse engineer by just plugging them into like a search bar in Twitter. We weren't going to reverse engineer 2 million tweets. But they did also, LAPD had given Edge NPD, do you remember, like a list of accounts specifically for ABT Shield to collect tweets on? And I think from that, even though they didn't reveal the names, by again actually doing some of that searching, I think we're able to identify several specific like people / accounts that were being targeted, which were all, my recollection is basically Antifa related. Do you remember? We can look back, and I should say, on the Brennan Center's website, basically if you search, well, at this point, if you search Brennan Center on social media, you'll get a bunch of stuff. But if you search Brennan Center, like law enforcement, social media, or public records, you'll get kind of a portal into everything that we got on LAPD. So it includes a web page that has a pretty substantial and detailed rundown and links into every document that we got. It includes also a chart that shows for all of those tools, all those providers, basically what we learned about their capabilities vis-a-vis the LAPD and more broadly, and probably 3 or 4 blog posts that we published, and then also the Guardian article. So you can also dig in a bunch there.
Comment on that, Sam?
No, I mean, yeah, there weren't through those documents like a ton of specific people I recall. I mean, we did reverse engineer the tweets and just see sort of whose tweets were being captured, but it's probably like tweets of everyone in this room. I mean, because it was such a broad, expansive, like I know it was people in this room and stuff, and and that wasn't like it was an ongoing thing. It was just they were collecting massive amounts of tweets, and so it's hard to know exactly like how that played out. I mean, I think with other programs that Stop LAPD Spying has looked at, they've seen specific people, right? Like those who are labeled as quote unquote chronic offenders and stuff that LAPD has been targeting, but that's a little bit different.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that was the chronic offender program and some of the other things as well. So it's 8 o'clock and we are coming to a close. Does anybody have any last pressing thought or comment or any question before we wrap up? Yes, please.
I was just curious of all the various third-party companies, like where are they all based? Like how many are American, how many are foreign, and like what countries?
Yeah, so Voyager, which was the one that had those very sort of like Islamophobic case studies, is an Israeli company, right? Or am I mixing? I have a lot of companies in my brain. I think Voyager had offices in Israel and in DC and elsewhere. The people I was corresponding with were in Israel who responded to like media requests, but there's not a lot of transparency. And that one other company, Edge NPD, which really is not doing anything more with LAPD as far as we know, was a Polish company. And then the other ones are American companies like Data Miner, Geophedia, Media Sonar. Yeah, all of those I think are American companies.
It's a global issue, and obviously, just that's how the apartheid state of Israel operates as well. So, so it is a global issue, and it's all around us. So, with that, I also want to first of all thank Rachel and Sam and Emilio for taking the time. And Rachel actually flying in from New York to be a part of this conversation, so really, really appreciate from DC. Gosh, I keep on saying New York. From DC, for making the trek. So yeah, but thank you all very much. And also Emilio, who was online and joined us from there. There's food out there. There's pupusas. There's vegan and carne and chicken pupusas. So please go help yourself. And next Tuesday, we will see you all. Please come on out, 838 East 6th